Welcome to the Tic-Tective Podcast, a program of the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, where our mission is to make Lyme disease easy to diagnose and simple to cure. I'm your host, Dana Parrish, and I'm the co-author of the book Chronic, and I sit on the advisory board of Bay Area Lyme Foundation. This program offers insightful interviews with scientists, clinicians, patients, and other interesting people. We're a nonprofit based in Silicon Valley, and thanks to a generous grant that covers 100% of our overhead, all of your donations go directly to our research and prevention programs. For more information about Lyme disease, please visit us at bayarealyme.org. Dr. Jill Crista is a leading expert on tick-borne diseases and toxic mold illness, two hugely important factors in keeping people chronically ill and things that are so poorly understood, as you know, and hard to untangle. She has a lot of answers for us, and I am so honored to get to talk to her today. She's also a best-selling author of Break the Mold, and I highly recommend it. I can't tell you how excited I am for you to hear this conversation today. Many of you sent questions in, and I was able to ask her directly for you. And I hope that you get so much benefit from this conversation. Thank you so much for watching. I was telling my husband this morning when we were talking about this interview, he knows I've been excited about it for like 3 or 4 months whenever we first connected through our mutual friend, Mike Ravino, who I know we both adore. Oh, he's the best. My husband, Andy, was asking me about you this morning. And I was like, well, the way I describe her is this magical little fairy that comes from the sky, dumps a little gem of information and goes back up and comes back down and goes back up. And that's literally my visual. So I just wanted to tell you that.
Love it.
I think you should know.
You don't know how true that is, actually.
Well, we just learned you lived on another planet, and I think that's groundbreaking news.
Yeah, there you go.
I just wanted to start your own personal journey. I can only imagine how much it's informed your view and your relationship to all these different elements in the world that are making us so sick. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I started in southern Wisconsin, where I started my practice. It turns out Wisconsin is usually in the top 5 in any given year of cases of Lyme disease. And so yeah, everyone thinks of it as a Northeast thing. And I can remember the very first Lyme conference that I went to in the Northeast. It was probably 2006 or something like that. I went to a ILADS conference. People are like, Wisconsin, huh? Why are you here? You know? So, but then when you look at the incidence map, it's like, oh yeah, that's a big hot button area. And I didn't realize that about where I was moving to. We had ticks as kids and it was kind of no big deal, but that was Wyoming. Wisconsin has a whole other kind of crop of tick and type of tick carries a different kind of disease, plethora of diseases, so to speak. So here I was in Lyme country and didn't know really what I was doing with Lyme because it is very complex. And so I went to a Lyme conference and then was like, okay, then I might as well do the ILADS training and become Lyme literate and, so I can really help people. Did that. And it was amazing. Like when you find and treat the cause, people tend to get better.
Yeah. It's very amazing how that happens. Yeah.
Right. And the classic Lyme, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, is you're doing everything that makes sense and not getting the progress that you should be getting.
Right.
And it's the great mimicker. So all it's going to do is make whatever your normal Achilles heel was worse. And so finally, when I was able to see it, I put on my Lyme goggles and I was like, oh, now I understand when it's Lyme and I could get to it a lot faster. We could treat a lot faster. I learned about early treatment and how important that was. And so I think prevented a lot of chronic Lyme cases by doing adequate early treatment. But I had a subset of patients that just were not getting better. And in one of those patients, they found toxic black mold in a remodel. And the contractor said, well, this has been a problem since they remodeled it, which was about a 10 or 12 year time period. And I thought, well, I wonder if that's what's going on with why he's not getting better from Lyme. And I hit PubMed, I hit the research, and it was like my Pandora's box moment of, oh my goodness, I'm missing mold all over the place. I had so many, I think all but one of those whole cases had either a current or a past exposure to mold. So
This
that's
is
what
just
I'm
like
kind of,
not taught from what
it's,
I know from every sector of medicine. And it's like one of
yes,
the dirty little secrets, isn't it?
it's
Just,
so tricky. And I understand, it took me a while to understand why, why aren't we taught this? And it was because we know from, interestingly enough, biowarfare research that
uh-huh.
these toxins are carcinogenic. They can cause birth defects. They can completely disarm the immune system. They can
Yes.
change the genes. And now I'm terrifying everyone that's listening. They can do all of these things. And so much so, so harmful to human health that they're using it as biowarfare in militaries
Yes.
around the world. Okay, so how do you create a research study that says, okay, we're gonna recruit for this study. By the way, we're gonna poison you with something that we know can kill you, so we can figure out what we need to give you to get you better. If you go looking into the research, and I get flack on this all the time from, medical doctors and naturopathic doctors and osteopathic doctors. We're all taught this, evidence-informed medicine. I say, I would love to show you the randomized clinical control trials, but we're not allowed to do those because of medical ethics. So
Yeah.
this is a different kind of conversation in medicine. And we have to start opening our minds to this, that just because we don't have human trials, we have a lot of animal studies. We are
Yeah.
then in clinical practice forced to be in a position where we're doing what's called translational medicine, which is where you
Right.
usually take an animal study and you apply it to a human. We can't do that with these toxins. So
Yeah.
that's why mold is taught as just an allergen, because the spores we know create allergies. The spores can induce mast cells, and the spores can infect people if they have enough immune depletion.
Yeah.
But we can't do it with all the other parts of mold. And in my patient population, well, probably about 75 to 80% of the symptoms are from the toxins. Only 10 to 15 are because of the spores. And so this entire amount
So
of
important. That's like the key that people
it's
need to know. It's
huge.
pure poison. It
Yeah.
sounds crazy if this is the first time you're hearing it, but as
Mhm.
someone who has gone through it, I
Yeah.
can attest to the fact that it's true and correct.
Yeah. Yep. And so here I was in that position of having to do translational medicine for my
Yeah.
patient.
Yeah.
And I refined it, over and over again, was like, it's kind of working. What I'm doing is kind of working,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you get your system. And then funnily enough, as I was creating a little course online for doctors, because I was like, I
Mhm.
might as well share what's working. Because in my tiny community, people knew me as the mold expert in the Lyme world, so there's
Yeah.
this, like, when you get known, whatever, then you start seeing the more complicated cases. Like, oh, I
Sure.
might as well teach it. I was teaching a mold doctor training as we were getting mold in my house, which is just ironic. So
So sorry.
we moved into a new home to us. It was maybe only like a 3 or 4 year old home, but there were critical building errors that were made around the plumbing, and
Yeah.
all 3 floors were affected.
Yeah.
All but one room was affected.
Yeah.
And where we live is similar to where you live. It's gorgeous in the fall, late summer, fall, we had all the windows open. As we slowly closed up the windows for winter, we closed in the toxin and got sicker
Yeah.
and sicker and sicker. And by February, it was just like brain fog, all my Achilles heel stuff, which is hormonal, perimenopause, all that kind of stuff. Um, Fatigue, all my old chronic Lyme stuff came back, and
Oh,
my kids I was like, we're having a rough time with puberty in my house. And, my kids
yeah.
I had given them Lyme, in utero. So, their stuff started to activate, and it was just like, no, it wasn't any of that. It was mold, but I didn't even realize it. So even as the person who was teaching the class to doctors about mold
Yeah.
treatment, it duped me. When you're in it, the brain fog is real. I came by this honestly.
I also think that it tricks you and that it keeps you in it. There's some survival mechanism. Tell me if I'm crazy, where I feel like mold mycotoxins want you there. They want you to stay. They don't want you dusting and sweeping and cleaning and getting rid of it. There's something that it does to your mood, to your psyche, to your
Mhm.
brain. And is that a real thing?
Yeah, it's like Jedi mind tricking you, that just like stay, and there are actual chemical reasons why that's happening. So when
Hmm.
I'm not trying to anthropomorphize the mold, but it's causing profound mitochondrial fatigue. It changes how our mitochondria make energy, and it changes our sensitivity to our electrical system in our body. So we actually become sensitive to our own EMFs that we create. Our own frequency will rise when we move our bodies. There's lots of really cool piezoelectric things that you can see with fascia and stuff like that. But if you are mold sick and that is sensitive, basically, I think of it as having bare wires, that
Wow.
having to move the body is painful and fatiguing,
Interesting.
and you don't
Interesting.
have the energy and you don't have the nervous system coding, or it's not functional anyway, so that it's harder to move and motivate. Yeah,
So
it's
how
wild,
common?
isn't it?
It's wild. It's wild because there's so many systems of the body involved.
Yes.
And and people think of it, as you said, as an allergy. It's my lungs, it's my sinuses. Okay, yes, but it's also potentially your brain. It's neurotoxic, it's toxic for the heart, it's toxic for the joints, right? Isn't it like just bladder,
Everything.
everything? And
Mhm.
so how does one even know where to begin to unravel this toxic stew, these infections? How do we know what's what? I've heard you talk about certain clinical symptoms that in my view are maybe less common with Lyme. So for
Mhm.
example, yes, I hear about tinnitus in Lyme. Okay, for sure. But it's kind of in my world more rare that
Mhm.
I hear about it. I seem to hear about it more with mold. Is that like
Yep.
one of those things? What else is there that we can sort of distinguish that might be one of your little
Yeah,
magical
yeah.
fairy dusts?
Let me just drop in really quick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you could just drop in, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, frequently changing vision is another one that is highly unique to mold type biotoxins. This can happen with Lyme because the Lyme bacteria love the fuel source of the inner part of our eye. They love to eat that. So you're going to get more floaters with Lyme, but you're going to
Okay.
get the frequently changing vision more with mold.
Okay, I'm dying right now because one of my mold symptoms was that I could read really well outside, didn't need glasses or reading glasses, inside like a different, like something like somebody put a film over my eyes. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty typical?
Yeah, very
Oh my
typical. So
God.
it's like little keynote things. I know we talked about interstitial cystitis. That's sort of like a mold keynote that's different from Lyme. The frequently changing vision, the ear ringing. I'm trying to think of, so pelvic pain is another one, and
Wow.
frequent urination. So if we have all the Lyme stuff, the Venn diagram of Lyme and mold is really, really similar. We know that Lyme will migrate where mold does not have that migration. So that's one of those things where, if somebody has all the mold symptoms and they have migration, I'm like, okay, we know that Lyme's going to basically raise its ugly head as soon as we start to lift the immunity of this person's body. Um,
Wow.
but mold is so immune suppressive. I find that it's far more immune suppressive than Lyme and
Yeah.
co-infections are, because of, that's what a mycotoxin is. So a mold will make this toxin in a competitive environment in order to poison another microbe so it can compete for territory. And the way that it poisons it is similar to how pesticides poison, is it paralyzes the nervous system of that microbe
Wow.
and the immune system of that microbe. So
Wow.
the response is not there to protect itself.
That is fascinating because it is so, when you're going through it, it's so terrifying because you just don't know what's happening. One of the first things that happened to me is that I felt something was really wrong with the house that we had just moved into, and it looked really great. And then I didn't know there was a crack in the foundation of the wall next to where I was sleeping. And the whole thing was 100%. If you touched it, it was wet. It wasn't that way until a certain point when it was. And I was spending a lot of time in that room because I was also doing a lot of interviews. I had like a little desk and a area where I was doing interviews for the book and stuff. So I was in that room a lot. I was the only one who got sick,
Mm.
and because I'm sitting there all day. And I started to sleep alone in that room because I was convinced that like my dog was carrying some, microscopic microbe that was, because there's this big problem in San Diego with mites. So because I didn't know, and I was itching and all this crazy symptoms, I did not have any of this with Lyme. Totally different.
Hmm. Oh, itching.
Um,
That's another keynote.
Yeah, my scalp, and I had like red rash that was burning all over my chest and
Mhm.
yeah, all over my head. Yeah, this is just crazy stuff. I just can't explain to people the terror of being like slowly poisoned. And one afternoon, I'd gone grocery shopping, and I had put a bunch of groceries away. And I went out for a walk, and my husband texted me a few hours later with three question marks and a photo of a frozen burrito in the silverware drawer. What did you do? And I had no recollection of doing it. I don't know why. And I wrote on the outside of the burrito because I had just had that infection co-grow with mold. It infected my finger. I had to have an emergency surgery before we had this mold thing. And it's like an infection that mostly happens when you're immune suppressed, or it often happens
Like
only.
a
And I
staph infection kind of
it
thing,
was
or
worse.
pseudomonas.
It was Pseudomonas.
Yeah.
It was Pseudomonas.
Hmm.
And so I had, because my hand was healing, I did have like certain burritos earmarked as like my ice burrito, it was perfect thing to hold if you're recovering from
Oh, I
concussion.
love it.
So I would like, but I was writing like in a marker that doesn't stay on. Like it was just like a total crazy person doing this and leaving it in the silverware drawer. And that's how I knew something else was really badly
Something's
going on in
going
that
on.
house.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the thing. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost
No, I
dementia.
believe it. I believe it. I've had patients get dementia from CPAP machines that were moldy, which by the way, if anyone's listening, CPAP machines, if you are not running something to clean that up. And my favorite is an ozone machine called So Clean, all one word, SO Clean. Um,
Okay.
it's an ozone machine. It's a closed system and it runs ozone through the CPAP machine. So you just take it off in the morning, put it in, close the top. It runs a cycle and it will run it through the fan mechanism because that's where the mold can happen.
Wow.
And change your tubes on time, change your mask on time, like do all of those things because I've had miraculous cures of dementia, Lewy body, all kinds of things by fixing the mold in a CPAP machine. So
Oh my
these
gosh,
are,
that's
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. And
This
they
is
also grow endotoxin, which is extremely toxic to the lung tissue. So you're breathing that all night long. I mean, it's, yeah. So
I
please clean your machines. By the way, the So Clean and any ozone will degrade the valves more quickly, and so it negates the warranty. I will take that over having mold mycotoxins going into your brain any day.
any
Yeah.
day.
Mhm.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So what do you do about testing? Like, I know that we just talked about some clinical descriptors that can sort of separate different infections from toxic mold. Do you
Mhm.
have a testing protocol that you recommend? Because I know a lot of doctors want to know this information too.
Yeah, I think I've done more split sample testing than anybody on the planet, which is basically taking the same person, taking urine, blood, and sending it off to many labs in the same day.
Mm.
I've also done things where we did first morning urine compared to 6 hours, compared to 24 hours. I have identical twins myself, and when we had mold in our home, we did accidental experiments because one was really good at taking glutathione and one wasn't. And, same exposure, same diet, same genetics.
Wow.
It was perfect, setup.
Wow.
And I have a friend with identical twins who she was my control, and then they had mold in their house. So we learned a lot through time. So I
Oh my
think,
gosh.
yeah. And I have, many patients where they were willing to test more often out of their own pocket, and then I would pay for the rest of the tests at the same time so that we could see, what's the at that time I was trying to figure out what's the quote best test.
Yeah.
My conclusion is there is no best test. My conclusion
Mm.
is that's the wrong question. The right question to ask is, what is the question you're trying to answer right now? Because that's going to completely change what you choose for treatment. And in most cases, the most critical question for a toxin-based illness is, am I in mold right now? Because if you are, you need to get out and you need to remediate. You need to take care of the exposure. 50% of people in occupational exposures or occupational studies, half the people that leave that building after they remediate and they get better, they're better. So the number one part of treatment is get out. of the mold exposure.
Mm.
Okay.
What about
Half
getting
the
rid of
people,
stuff? Okay, go
yeah,
ahead. Well,
yeah.
yeah, because
So
I,
half the
okay.
people need a little extra help. And these are people who don't just have respiratory issues, they also have what they call extra respiratory.
Yeah.
So this is getting into the toxins, story. So the cluster that I look at is, and this is what I teach in my doc course. I have one coming up called Updates in Mold Related Illness. So if you're a doctor and you're like, I want the data,
Yeah.
there's data to back this up, is to do a visual contrast sensitivity test,
Yeah.
which is an indicator of biotoxin exposure. Um, and no single test is going to say, yes, this is mold. So that's why I do a cluster. We would do a urine mycophenolic acid. And what that
Okay.
is, MPA, it's short. Mycophenolic acid is a mold metabolite, which means if there's actively living mold, it will be spitting out this metabolic byproduct anytime it's metabolizing. So where there is mold growing, there is always MPA, but not necessarily mycotoxins. So there can be a moldy problem with no mycotoxins in the building. If there's no competition, if there's, it's a single species trapped behind building material and it's got just enough moisture, it's happy mold. It's not competing, so it's not going to make more toxins. If
I
it's a
see. Oh,
little
that's
bit, it's
amazingly
really
interesting.
important to understand this.
Ah,
Um, because if it's a little bit exposed to air, other spores, because there's spores in our air all the time, can
mhm.
find that sweet spot, what I call lakefront property, that you have in your in your house
Yeah. Yeah.
that you're providing to the mold and
Yeah.
don't even know it.
Sure.
Where there's mycotoxins, there's more than one mold. That's for sure.
Okay.
So I want to know, are you exposed to mold that's metabolizing right now? A urine MPA points more arrows toward this is a current exposure problem. A blood test called a MyMycoLab,
Yeah.
IgE. IgE is an immediate sensitivity, and in toxin-based illnesses, if there's been a significant exposure in the previous 2 to 4 weeks, usually it's around 2 weeks, um, that IgE can come up.
I
And so
see.
if you're seeing high IgE on blood, urine mycophenolic acid, a bad visual contrast test, so that's 3 out of my total 4.
Yeah.
Fourth one is to run a mold allergy test, and that's
Mm.
an allergy or an antibody to the spore. So we've got now a test for spore exposure, and no one should be allergic to mold, by the way. If you're allergic to mold, I have a high suspicion that you're a colonized person or you're in mold right now.
Ah, very
We
interesting.
should live very peacefully with that.
Mm. Okay.
So mold allergy, which is a spore allergy, antibodies to mycotoxins, mold metabolites in your urine, and a bad visual contrast. That's a lot of arrows pointing to the fact that you're in mold right now. And
Yep.
then I can feel very confident asking my patients to spend the money on a good inspector. Let's find the problem. A lot of times, if somebody is waiting for an inspector because they're booked out a long way, we will start with a mycotoxin dust test
Okay.
that I use through, it's called Hayes Microbial. It's
Okay.
$300, but it gives you 25 plus mycotoxins. And so if you have
Oh,
mycotoxins in your space and you're a sick person, you need to get out of your space. And then you wait until you can get the inspector in there to find out where exactly it is. And if it was
okay.
a past problem, like in your case, it was a water damaged space, um, there might be mycotoxins from a past exposure because mycotoxins stick to the particulate. So I highly recommend everybody when you're moving in a new space, wash your walls and ceilings. Like there's particulate stuck on those things.
That's
Get,
interesting.
get the
That was
toxin.
part of the remediation process.
Yeah, they should do
I
that.
did not move back in because I did consult a couple of remediation companies and people like Mike Rubino.
Yeah,
They were like, to be very honest with you, like if you were my sister or my wife, I would tell you to just cut your losses and get out of the house.
yeah.
I didn't ever set foot back in there ever
Good
again.
for you. And this is
Yeah,
why you're still upright. You know, I think a
I'm
lot of
lucky
people get
because
attached.
yeah, I'm fortunate that we figured it out. I'm
Mm.
fortunate that because of my background with Lyme, I was completely aware that it was a real thing, that wasn't a fake thing. There's this whole
Right.
dogma. We'll talk about that later. The
Yeah.
myths about Lyme, mold, sorry, and Lyme too, like not being real.
Yeah.
Um, and I felt instinctively and intuitively that I was dying and it had something to do with the house. And
Yeah.
it's like not my default to ever think I'm dying. And it's not my default to ever pin it on a house. It was the first time in my whole life this had happened. Not that I've never been exposed to mold. I'm sure I have millions of times. I'm just saying the profound nature of what I was being exposed
Yeah.
to was was literally like one thing you said that I will never forget. You said, you may not even remember half these things because you probably just say them like, oh, you just know them. I didn't know this. I could never get comfortable in the house. So it was like just such a beautiful home. And we brought all our furniture from New York. All my favorite things I wasn't comfortable sitting on. I kept walking from chair to chair, room to room, sofa to sofa. I mean, why couldn't I get comfortable? Mold. And you said that on some
Yeah.
interview that you did. And I remember having that light bulb moment of that explains that because
Yeah.
it's just some instinctual thing or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because the toxins are literally getting into the brain, and the brain limbic system is saying, we're not safe. We're being poisoned.
Yes,
But the mycotoxins have no odor. So we've all smelled mold and musty, whatever. So for people that are
sure.
listening, like you've had this experience, so they wouldn't necessarily know, like, well, didn't you know you had mold? Didn't you smell it?
Yeah, everybody says that kind of stuff.
All the time.
No. Yeah,
And it's
obviously
because,
not.
yeah, or you would have picked up on it,
Yeah,
right?
of
But that's
course.
the problem, is that the toxins, the regular mold metabolites, we were talking about mycophenolic acid, that's the musty, moldy smell. But if it's all trapped behind building material, the
Yes.
mycotoxins are nanoparticle size. They can move into the breathing zone that, Michael Rubino talks about that. Like there's our breathing zone. But if you have any outlets or can lights, or anytime you've cut it like that vent right there, that is now continuous with what's going on behind my walls. And so every time someone opens the front door, it kind of pulls that air right in. And these nanoparticles can come through those little spaces. They can come through drywall, they can come through tile grout,
Yes.
and they are now in our breathing zone. They're nanoparticle size. And when we're breathing them, our brain says, we're being poisoned. And then
Yes.
the eyes look and they're like, I don't see mold. I don't see a problem. Ears don't hear
Yes.
anything. If anything, all of the ears are hearing is ringing. And there's no smell, there's no taste, there's no tiger. Like, why do we need to get out of the house? There's nothing wrong with the house. It's
And
beautiful.
why am I sick, but Johnny's not sick? Why am I sick and my two kids feel fine, but the dog is acting weird? Right? Isn't this the thing that happens
Yeah.
with all of us where we're like, are we like, why do we feel so sick and everybody else seems okay? What's that about?
What's wrong with me?
What's wrong with me? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And
But do
that's
we
all
lose our
about genetics.
tolerance? It's about genetics. I was going to ask you, so what happens, for example, when is it another like hit of some sort that makes you kind of lose your tolerance for mold? Like if you're living in mold for a long time, maybe you don't know it. And then all of a sudden you get sick from it after 5 years, but you felt fine and like something was a tipping point. Is that
Mhm.
is that pretty common that people lose tolerance for it at some point, or is it just always
Yeah.
poisoning you in the background? What's going on? Yeah.
So always poisoning you in the background. So again, I said in the beginning that, I talked about biowarfare, like this stuff is so toxic
Yeah.
that otherwise, they wouldn't use it for that purpose. So it's a matter of time, duration, dose, which kind of mold are you exposed to? Are they making toxins? Is it happy mold or upset mold, competitive mold?
Yeah.
And then your genetics and also your own nutritional status. So people who are lower in a fish oil called DHA.
Mm,
That DHA portion is a structural component of our brain and our cellular membranes. And there
mhm.
are really great animal studies that show that animals that have sufficient DHA, their cell membranes will actually resist mycotoxin intrusion.
How
So
do we
you
get
don't,
this? Like, how do we
yeah,
get
supplement,
DHA? What
supplement.
what brand? Like, where can we get the right brand? Because there's so
Yeah.
much out there and we don't know what's
There's a lot
good.
out there. You want to look for something that's a very high DHA to EPA ratio.
Okay.
And like we're looking for a 5 to 1. So it's usually the other way around. Usually most fish oils are higher in EPA than DHA. So look for something that's high in DHA. Prenatal fish oil is often a way. So that's always a fun conversation when I treat a lot of kids and I'll hand like a mom and I'm like, here's your 8-year-old's DHA and it says prenatal DHA. They're
Yeah.
like, really? I'm like,
That
don't
makes
look at
sense
the
though. That
label.
totally, yeah.
Don't look at the label. I'm not,
Yeah.
yeah. Like
Is
you
there
want
a
my
brand that you
8-year-old?
recommend that
Yeah,
you
so
like?
the for kids I use the prenatal because of the dosing. That's from Nordic Naturals. And then
Hmm.
full disclosure, I'm part of formulating mold products for a company called Alight Health
Totally.
Formulas.
Okay,
Um,
great.
yep, so they have the key with these fats is you want to get them in the triglyceride form. Otherwise, people that with mold sickness, the bile absorption thing is not working appropriately. So they need the triglyceride form is the best way to get these fish oils in. So at Alight, what we've done is a 5-to-1 ratio of the triglyceride form of DHA.
Can we get these on your, seriously, like, I don't know where to get all this stuff. Like
Yeah,
the
you can
easiest
get
way,
it
can
off
we go on
the
your website or?
Yep. So there's my website is drkrista.com, but you can always get an account with Alight Health Formulas and get the whole, there's protocols there for if you see this certain mycotoxin, this is the steps, here's the bundle. We're trying to make it really easy on people.
That is that's actually super great and helpful. I took Nordic Naturals because
Yeah.
I just heard that it was well sourced and it was good quality. And so, I think it helped. I think moving helped the
Yeah.
most. I think
Moves. Yeah.
time helped the most, but I did all the things that I could do and that I knew that I knew how to do. And I probably didn't do
Mhm.
it perfectly, but it was really like chronic time of moving. But
Yeah.
there's always the question, you can't keep going through this, like what happens if you can't move? Like, and you can't afford, because we all know, mold remediation is an extremely expensive endeavor. It's why insurance companies stopped paying for it in the 90s. It's a big scandal. And we can post some articles about that. I certainly love doing that because I like to show doctors and non-believers what really happened and why they don't know about this and why it's not promoted. Because there's
Right.
widespread mainstream articles about it that stopped in the 90s. In the New York Times, some amazing stuff that I collected over the years. What do you do if you really can't make that happen?
Yeah. We know from animal studies. So they know situations where they are not going to get them out of the moldy barn.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna, they try to figure out what can we add to feed instead of fixing the problem. But that's another thing, right? And then there's we're gonna feed them incidentally moldy food and whatever. But from true inhalational exposure, not just dietary,
Yeah.
there are some animal studies that show us there are some really key nutrients that are protective. So DHA is one of them. That whole
Okay.
thing where it beefs up the cellular membrane so the mycotoxins literally can't get into like your liver cell or your nervous system cell. So that's a big one. A person's glutathione status is really important, but that gets a little tricky because if they're colonized and we add the sulfur from the glutathione, we could be helping the mold make more mycotoxin. So
That was the
I'm
first
always,
time I learned about that. That's
yeah, I'm always
really
a little
point.
careful with that. So if somebody has a lot of itching as part of their symptom picture,
Yeah.
there's a very high possibility you have high gliotoxin. And that is the one mycotoxin that out of all of them, I say treat that one first. Because then
Okay.
once you treat that one, and the protocol from Alight goes through all of the steps of how to do that, then it opens up treatment for all the rest of the stuff. So
I see.
I don't necessarily say everybody should be on glutathione if you're in mold and you can't get out. And that's probably something not to do if you're in mold and can't get out if you have any kind of sinus symptoms or gut disruption, because then we're probably going to be helping the mold that is trying to colonize your body. Or if you have mast cell symptoms, sulfur sensitivity, don't take glutathione until you're out of the mold, until we get you going. But there are 4 other nutrients. So they found selenium, acetylcarnitine, CoQ, and vitamin E. So those were given as a quad as being like a protective plethora of things, like all at the same time, can be very protective to the cells, the liver, the kidneys, all of the things that get hit when you're in mold. And with my
That's
patients, what I
fascinating.
had them do is try to eat extra spices that are antifungal. So like sage, bay, cinnamon, clove, those kinds of spices will help kind of keep the lid on the colonization. So you really spike everything. Spike your minestrone with a little extra oregano, spike your spaghetti sauce with a little extra oregano, all those kind of things. Like add clove, cinnamon, and nutmeg to your coffee and make it, like a chai coffee or something like that. So those
Yeah,
are all things that because we eat them regularly, it doesn't alarm the mold. Because what we find is that when we administer antifungals to mold in a petri dish, it will start to kick up its production of mycotoxins to defend itself. So if we go too strong with the antifungals while you're in mold, and this is all depending on the person, some people just need the extra help. Like a good nystatin dose can really save somebody, but we want to give just enough to prevent. And there are certain plants, like I was just saying, these kitchen herbs that are not only antifungal in their activity, but they're anti-mycotoxic. And what does that mean? That means it prevents the mold from making more mycotoxins to defend itself. So it's beautiful.
got it.
We can add these. So what we've done at Alight is I've formulated something called Myco Repel, and it's designed for that very purpose, the person who's stuck in mold. It has all the things that were shown in the animal studies to help. Quercetin also was shown to help to reduce that. The only thing it doesn't have is a DHA because that has to be in a certain kind of absorbable form and it would bond
Understandable.
with the other nutrients.
But you can take them in the same
Yeah,
day, at the same time. And this
yeah,
is safe to start. Obviously, always check with your doctor. We always say that, but this is
yeah.
generally safe to start if you're on the average, if you're 75 or 65 and you're on statins and blood pressure,
Mm.
are these things all pretty safe? You can just start them. There's no real big red flags with drug interactions and stuff like that.
Yeah, not with these particular things. No, because they're all
Okay.
nutritive. It's stuff that they were adding to animal feed and are in order to protect the animals from the negative impacts of their moldy environment.
Can
So
it
yeah,
can
they're
it turn
beautiful.
back the time, the time, but can it turn back the effects? Obviously it seems like it can really be neuroprotective and protective from
Mhm.
going forward. Can it kind of get you back to a better place too,
A
rather than just
better
not,
place.
yeah.
Yeah, and I've found that these nutrients that I've been using in practice, and now it's so nice because I could smoosh it into one thing.
Yeah, it's
Now, like, here's
amazingly
this,
great.
5 bottles, take 2 of those in one day and 3 of those the next day. But yeah, what I find is when people get out of mold, then they're in much better shape and the recovery time is shortened. So there's improvement while you're in mold. And the one thing I didn't say is those 3 things, the DHA, those, nutrient combinations, and then some kind of binder that is going to be pulling the toxin out. But if all we're doing is binding bile, which is what an inhalational exposure, the toxins end up in bile.
Yes.
So I use insoluble fiber for that if someone can tolerate it. If they can't, we use aloe. Long chain polysaccharide aloe is a very gentle binder that won't, cause a lot of nutrition deficiencies. So if you have something where you're binding, you want to make sure you're putting good fats in so you create an oil change in the body. So that's
Okay.
an important piece I didn't say.
That's really great. So when you say insoluble fiber, is that
Mhm.
like the kind of stuff you can go to CVS or wherever and just get
I'd go to a health food store and get
health food store?
organic, like
Okay.
psyllium husk. So really, that's what Metamucil is.
Yeah,
Lots of people take Metamucil. Why do they take it? To be regular, number one, and to lower cholesterol. Well, what's cholesterol? Cholesterol is in the bile. So we know it's an effective bile binder
oh,
because we
that's so
we see
interesting.
people's cholesterol go down when they take Metamucil. So Metamucil is loaded with, junk,
Yeah,
dyes, and all that.
sure.
So you can go to a health food store and get finely ground psyllium husk, and you can stir it in water if you want to, but the other thing you do is just dribble it over every time you eat and try to get 2 tablespoons done throughout the day. And it
Great.
makes it so easy. You don't have to time it away from food and all the stuff that makes taking supplements crazy making, if you're doing
Well,
things.
it's so interesting because before we started recording, we were talking about cholestyramine, and I was under the impression that was like the key thing, to getting when you are exposed to certain mycotoxins, that you should be on cholestyramine. And a lot of people can't tolerate it. I took it for a few months. I can't say I had any benefit or any harm from it. I just sort of neutrally took it, didn't do anything great. The only thing that helped me was moving. So I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But but a lot of people take it, but it sounds like what you might be saying is that insoluble fiber could be the replacement for something like cholestyramine. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yep.
Okay.
So
And it's really
cholestyramine is
safe
the
and
bile binder, and
mm,
it's a non-specific binder, and it grabs a lot of stuff. So the biggest problem with cholestyramine that I have with my patients is constipation. The second
mhm.
is timing, that people have to take it so far away from every medication and supplement and away from
Yes.
food, and it just becomes a big pain. And also it's a pharmaceutical. If you can't do it compounded, you're also getting some junk in that
That's
too.
true.
So we
Sugar
don't want to
or a
add to the
sugar
toxic
substitute.
problem,
Yeah,
Yeah. So
you're
that's
absolutely right.
the insoluble fiber. What they find in the studies is that it is, it's not as strong as cholestyramine, but it is a good, effective bile sequestrant, but it also nourishes the microbiome. We get our fat soluble nutrients from our microbiome digesting certain types of fiber to pull out and extract things like vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin K, our CoQ10, all of these things that run our whole system. Our microbiome actually makes that out of the food. It needs to digest it out of the food. So if we're giving insoluble fiber, we're actually helping our microbiome with some of its favorite food.
That is so fascinating.
It is.
What
It's amazing.
one sort of more gentle binder I have heard people using is chlorella.
So I use chlorella when we're talking about heavy metals because it is
Ah,
a good chelation. It grabs things that are in that chelate form. In animal studies, you'll see that, and by the way, I want everyone to understand, like animal binder studies, what is happening there is not that they're trying to find the best binder.
yeah.
They are trying to find a manufacturing waste product that could suffice as an okay binder so that they can make money off their waste products. That's what the binder studies are. Okay, so I want
Well,
everyone to just put that in there. Like, this isn't about finding the best way. So
uh-huh.
they're finding things like chlorella, clay, okra. They're taking the cuttings of okra, they dry it, they pulverize it. So okra juice, probably not a great binder. Okra dried, pulverized, where there's a lot of surface area, pretty good binder. But is it the
Yeah,
best binder?
yeah.
And of what is the question. So what they are doing is they're putting these binders into food because they know that they're going to be eaten mold. In inhalational exposure, meaning you're breathing it in,
Mhm.
it gets delivered to the bloodstream where it goes to the kidneys and the liver to get detoxified, which we need to talk
I
about
gotcha.
detoxification. In the liver, it gets into bile. So what are we binding in a moldy building exposure? We're binding bile. Unless the person is really constipated, then that bile and the mycotoxin can come apart, and then we're binding specific mycotoxins. But if we can keep someone pooping regularly, which is number one step before any binding, I have a little rule of thumb, no binders if you're bound up, because if you're not pooping, now that mycotoxin can come off the bile, and a loose mycotoxin in the gut can cause bleeding from the gut. It can cause
Oh my
damage to the
God, I
gut.
didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
So we don't want to pull that mycotoxin. Think of bile like a fat ball that's like protecting your intestinal wall from the mycotoxins.
Yeah.
So if you're constipated, that mycotoxin can come off and it causes damage to the lining of the intestinal and that intestinal cell called an enterocyte. It can
I
cause
see.
it to have early cell death, basically, which then we can
Wow.
bleeding, ulceration, mucus, different things like that. So someone can look like they have ulcerative colitis. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to what are we actually binding in a moldy building exposure. It's this biomicelle, and that's the pillow that's protecting your intestinal wall from the mycotoxin. Fiber and cholestyramine are the best biobinders. These other
Got it.
ones are binding loose stuff. So,
I gotcha. Okay. That
okay,
makes sense. What about is TUDCA in either of these? That
love
was on
it.
my list to ask you about. Okay.
Yeah, because that's a bile salt. So if we're going to be needing bile to detoxify these through the liver, if you don't have the raw materials to make enough bile, you're going to have a slower detoxification pathway.
Got
So
it.
TUDCA, taurine, and glycine are amino acids that make good bile. TUDCA is the taurine amino acid stuck to the bile salt. So it gives it like the nutrition to make bile. So I kind of think of it as three steps. Like you pour good, healthy oil in with the good
Mhm.
fats, you know, the
Mhm.
DHA. You
Sure.
give something like bitters or TUDCA to try to make more bile, and then you catch it with a bile binder. And then you've just
Got it.
created an oil change.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned detox.
Yes.
And I think we should cover that next because people are going to want to know. So I'm doing these things that you mentioned, and now
Mhm.
what do I do? Like, is there a herxing, for people who don't know what that means, you could describe it as well, but basically it's die off and you get symptomatic. You might get more symptomatic because you are being exposed to byproducts of these dying pathogens or organisms. Is that a fair description? And
Yep. Very good.
you're
Yeah.
like getting a little bit worse for a little bit, and it's scary. So then the key is to detox. Mycotoxins are dying. Does it produce, like, I know this from Lyme because it's a really specific thing for Lyme, and it's a really terrible thing when
Mhm.
it happens. I went
Yeah.
through it. Um, is it the same with mold? And is that why we need to do this?
So I put detox above the antifungals. So I put that first in my
Mm,
pathways
mhm,
because we do know that mold is going to get mean
mm.
when it knows you're coming for it. It
Yeah,
will make more toxin. So let's
mhm,
get the first layer of toxin down so that your
yeah,
body can handle that reactive toxin thing. So it's not just like mold spores breaking open and spilling the toxin, like spilling their guts, and that's why you get the herx. In mold, it's also before they die, they're going out firing. And we don't see that with Lyme. Lyme doesn't make all these kind of endotoxins and exotoxins, but with mold, they do. They will make toxins to defend themselves.
I'm looking at your list, okay, because I've been taking
Yeah.
a few notes. Will when you take those things, the DHA, the resveratrol, we talked about body bio, cholestyramine,
Mhm.
I mean, phosphatidyl.
Phosphatidylcholine.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about those things, are you going to experience die-off?
Usually not. That is
Okay.
part of the detox. But the part that of detox that's forgotten all the time is
Mhm.
the kidneys. And the kidneys are the preferred detox route for most mycotoxins. So the body will, we talked about, you breathe it in, it gets in your bloodstream. Where does it go? Some goes to the liver, but most will go to your kidneys, and you have two of them.
Mhm.
So we could be doubling your detox power if we are helping the kidneys do what they want to do. But there's a problem. The ochratoxin, which we see a lot, people's ochratoxin stays high for a very long time.
Yeah.
Whether they're eating it or not, whether they're exposed to it or not, it'll stay. I call it a persister mycotoxin
Mm.
because it will bind really tightly with high affinity to a blood protein. So it gets a free ride everywhere in the body.
Mm.
Some do cross the blood-brain barrier, not all mycotoxins do. It'll get this ride on the blood protein, so it's perpetually in the system, and it's hard for the body to get rid of. And the way that we get rid of it is certain bioflavonoids like astaxanthin for
Yeah.
ochratoxin, will pull it off that blood protein so the kidneys can flush it. If it's bound to that protein, the kidneys can't flush it because we have to keep a certain amount of that blood protein in our system to maintain our blood pressure.
I see.
So when I see ochratoxin, zearalenone, citrinin, when I see those mycotoxins, I'm like, we're missing the kidneys. So I have another little rule of thumb, bioflavonoids before binders, because we can maximize detox through the kidneys, and then we take the pressure off the liver, and we don't have to do as much bile and binding and all that kind of stuff. It just is like lower priority then.
So what would they be? The
The
bioflavonoids?
bioflavonoids, yep,
Yeah.
resveratrol is one of them. So think of
Oh,
every
okay.
color of the rainbow. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Depends on the mycotoxin. Each mycotoxin has a certain bioflavonoid that has been shown in animal studies to assist with the kidney flushing of the toxin. So astaxanthin, delphinidins, pelargonidins. I mean, there's all these like, fancy words, but basically they're just saying, I'm the purple color bioflavonoid. I'm the green color bioflavonoid. So folinic acid is one of them. I'm the orange color one, which is astaxanthin, zeaxanthin, beta carotene. Lycopene is one of them.
Mhm.
So the entire color of the rainbow.
That makes sense.
Quercetin would be the yellow, which makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's like
It does.
we say eat the rainbow. It's not just, like a grandmother's fable. There's actual chemistry that's going on here to keep you from taking on these toxins. These
It,
have been around It's written about in the Bible. Mold has been
Yes.
around for a very long time. We have developed our foods, a healthy diet, to stay well despite some of these incidental exposures.
Yeah, it's fascinating that we have somehow survived all this
I know.
time with all this. And now we're adding in all kinds of new chemicals and new pathogens and bad air quality. And it's like, it's just so much. And, I wanted to also, I have to mention air quality because you talked a lot about inhalation. I keep thinking about, of course, this Dale Bredesen's famous study. I like to bring it up whenever I can, inhalation,
Yes.
Alzheimer's.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Every clinician watching this, every patient watching this who has concerns or loved ones that might be getting memory issues, read about the relationship between mold mycotoxin inhalation and Alzheimer's and dementia. Just
Yeah.
go a little bit down the rabbit hole, go on PubMed. It's not hard to find at all once you know what you're looking for. So I'm going to really strongly recommend that because I think there's a misconception that it's all that you're consuming. We can certainly eat moldy grains. We know they're stored badly. We know that they're toxic a lot, and we know that. But even when you go paleo and you're eating less and you do feel better, it doesn't mean that you're not breathing them in. I think that's probably the main source of neurological exposure. What do we do? Again, we can't move air purifiers, opening the doors and windows. Like, does it help? Does it really help to
Yeah.
ventilate?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And air purification, getting the particulate count down. I get asked a lot, what's your favorite air purifier? And it's one that doesn't allow for what's called a breathe-through effect of the filter. So the
Huh.
more the filter takes on the particulate in the area, the more it
Mhm.
can become a petri dish of its own.
Yeah.
And you can get a breathe-through effect of any mycotoxins that are on spores that are stuck in that filter can come through because they're nanoparticle size. So, and then if there's humidity, that filter can become a growth zone for mold.
Ah,
Always change your
interesting.
filters on time, please, everybody,
Yeah.
and maybe a little early. And then this particular brand is called IntelliPure. What they do is they zap the filter. So it creates a biostasis zone and it doesn't allow any mold that maybe got trapped on that to grow or make any kind of mycotoxins.
That's
So that's
interesting.
one of my favorite. I love to use, if they're tolerated, essential oils in the space because they have been shown to be fungistatic, meaning they're not allowing the mold to make mycotoxins in the space. So it gives you a little like, okay, now I'm only dealing with spores. I don't have to deal with all the chemicals part.
That's
Yeah.
really great. So like cedar, what are the things that
Yeah, I have a list of them that have been studied as not just fungistatic but anti-mycotoxic. On the footer of my website, I have a cleaning
okay,
solution, a DIY make your own all natural cleaning solution. I put all the essential oils on that. So if you want the
great.
list, it's on there. We have a chat bot on my website. You can ask, which essential oils, and it gives you the types and then the brands that I trust. Um, and most of this I'm just sharing. It's not affiliate links or anything like that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
yeah,
want
yeah.
everybody to know about all this stuff. So what else am I going to say? Oh, the really important thing with testing a body is that if you're running a mycotoxin test, you were just talking about, we do eat some of these mycotoxins,
Sure.
but there's a distraction in the insurance company industry and, real estate moguls. They're hiring lawyers to distract everything to this is all what they're eating. And
Mm.
so it's true, we can dump some of them through our pee or whatever, through a urine test if you're ingesting it. So I recommend everybody go on a low mycotoxin diet for 3 days before you do any urine testing. And I have a current list, again, in my website in the footer, in the handouts, you can get the urine mycotoxin test prep sheet. And it has
Okay.
the most current list of foods to avoid for 3 days. Why 3 days? Most mycotoxins that you eat will wash out through your urine in 48 hours. So
Okay.
if you do 3 days of a low mycotoxin diet, what is coming out in your urine is more likely to be something coming from your body stores, not from what you ate.
Got it. Oh,
So
okay.
important.
That is very important.
It's very important. Just good testing technique is so important. And if you're really, really sick, I don't know that your urine test is the best match because that
Yeah,
means you're not really detoxifying. So
got
then I
it.
would do the blood mycotoxin antibody. Yeah.
Got it.
So
So
there's some
what,
nuance, and I go over all this in my course for practitioners. If you're listening, there's nuance there isn't one best test. It's how do I create the best test for the question we're trying to answer for the patient in front of me and what kind of things they are dealing with.
does everybody have to do antifungals? Is it a must in order to heal from toxic mold illness, or is not everybody colonized?
In my experience, if people are dumping mycotoxins on a low mycotoxin diet,
Mhm.
and they're dumping mycotoxins, they're colonized. And does that mean whole body? Not necessarily. It could just
Mhm.
be sinus. But when I added antifungals to my whole picture of how I treat mold, and it's not always pharmaceuticals, it's rarely pharmaceuticals actually.
Mm.
I'm using plants most of the time.
Interesting.
People get better so much faster. And
Really?
I'm
Like,
a
what are you
very
using?
patient
That's
person.
amazing. Who has
Yeah,
time for this?
I know. Who has time to be that sick? And
It's true.
Brian Carr, We Inspect, gave it the best analogy. He was like, mold or fungus is the factory. The mycotoxins are just the smoke. So if you're not remediating a building and getting rid of all of the spores,
Yeah.
you're just going to keep having smoke. If you're just mopping up smoke. And I have that same analogy with the idea that we can put you on a binder and wait. That has never made sense to me because that's just mopping up the smoke. That's
Yeah.
not taking care of the factory. So
Yes.
there's some sort of microbiome disruption. We see this as we're testing more microbiomes because
Yeah.
that's now I'm like, oh, this is why this has been working because it causes complete microbiome disruption and dysregulation. Reduced commensal species, increased non-commensal species. That's going to drive how your brain thinks. That's going to drive your immune system. 70% of our immune system is determined by our gut. Over half of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut. Like this is why would we sit around and wait? Why not assist the body? We have all these beautiful plants, oregano, thyme, sage, pau d'arco. Clove is very specific for multicellular organisms like spores. There are a lot
Okay.
of yeast formulas out there that can take the yeast layer down, but they're not necessarily effective against the multicellular fungal species we see in the buildings. So those
Got it.
kind of plants, I just use those either in tea or in a supplement. If somebody's like, just give me a capsule, I'm not on
Yeah.
the tea thing.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. We can do it in a capsule and we can get people better.
So is it easy to find this stuff? Like, I guess I'm hearing this and I'm going, where do I go to have somebody
Yeah.
put this together as a protocol individually and
Yeah.
to just kind of keep an eye on things and see where I am?
It's really important because it's nice to have someone else's brain when you have brain fog,
Yeah.
have someone else be
And
the
this stuff
thinker.
is so complicated, it's just so complex. And like mainstream medicine is so completely ignorant about it, like
Yeah.
100%, right? Not a single. When I had severe mold toxicity and all this mast cell stuff, we didn't even talk about that stuff.
Oh yeah.
I was sent to an allergist at Scripps. And he was like, oh, good news. I got your blood test back. You're not like allergic to mold. Yeah, I know I'm not worried about an allergy. I'm poisoned. Like we're
Right.
talking a different language here, buddy.
Yes.
I
Yes.
need I
There's
need a different kind of help.
yeah. I have a video out there that says, congratulations, you're not allergic to mold.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
you know. That doesn't mean anything about mold related illness. That's just that little piece. So who can you go to? I have a certification course. It's a 10-hour intensive course. Any doctor that passes that test, they get put on my website, and it's basically find a mold literate doctor,
Oh,
and they are
fabulous.
given a mold literate stamp that they can put on their website so somebody who's been through the training and they know, the how to look at it with a whole lens. Yeah.
That is great. That's really, really great. I think that's
I'm
really
all about
important.
training more doctors.
I love it. I know, and I appreciate it so much. And a lot of people hopefully will watch this and will go to your website and learn more and take your course. I mean, it's there's a never-ending need for patients to get help with these
Yes.
complicated, complex illnesses, and they're really,
Yeah.
really hard. Mold and estrogen. That's a
Hmm.
big concern of mine because it seems like it can really wreak a lot of havoc and even contribute to certain cancers. And is that true?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately. There's a mold called Fusarium, which makes a mycotoxin called zearalenone that
Mhm.
is a xenoestrogen, which means it's an environmental estrogen mimicker, and
Mm.
it can stimulate the bad effects of estrogen and put someone in an estrogen dominant state. And that particular one is tied to infertility and estrogen-based cancers. It's also tied for men in having low testosterone and destruction to the testes. So
Got
it's
it.
a bad dude. Yeah.
Yeah, it
I mean,
sounds it.
any mycotoxin, as we talked about, how do you detoxify it is through the liver. So if you are overwhelming your liver with toxin, the job of getting rid of toxins, it's not going to be balancing your hormones. It doesn't have
Yeah,
time. So it's also just it can, create havoc on any hormonal system just from the toxin side of it.
that's interesting. I also hear a lot about weight gain or weight loss with
Yeah.
mold exposure. What's that about?
Yeah, so this is called myopenia, not sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is getting old from, or losing weight from getting old, and you lose muscle mass, and you can be skinny fat, and that's what
Uh-huh.
mold will do because
Hmm.
it disrupts protein synthesis. So
Hmm.
we can't make good skeletal muscle. So people will actually lose weight, but they will, on the whole, lose more muscle mass and gain
Mm.
more fat. So if you did a
Got it.
body comp, even if they're losing weight, they're losing the wrong kind of weight.
I
And if you're
see.
gaining weight, you're gaining the wrong kind of weight. You're gaining more of the fat. The body becomes leptin resistant. And I've found some studies, I get asked this all the time, how do I lose the weight after mold? I was trying to find out how do we correct this leptin resistance thing. It's really
What
a
is leptin?
tricky, leptin is think of it like insulin. It's a
Ah,
it's a trigger on the cell that says, go ahead and take in some nutrients. And so if you have so much leptin in the system, just like so much insulin in the system from eating too much fake sweeteners or whatever, then the cells start to say, I know you, NutraSweet. You told me you were coming with sweets, but there's no glucose there. So we're
yeah.
just going to shut the door. And that's what
Ah,
happens with mold is that there's a change in the brain and how it makes leptin that it can create leptin resistance in the cells. And you can get out of mold, you can get detoxified, and then there's a next step, which is
okay.
to get the pituitary hormones all working again. This
Okay.
ADH, so a lot of people have urine frequency that even if they're out of mold and they're detoxified, that dysregulated feedback loop of please hold on to water, like
Yeah.
hey, kidneys, we want to, and of course the kidneys are like, I would love to hold on to water, but I've got a bigger problem because I know this is toxic urine. So we're
Wow.
just going to keep moving. So all these feedback loops get messed up. If someone can get in the sunshine, it's profound for leptin resistance. I actually
Huh.
send some of my patients to the tanning booth, even though it's not the correct UV, it's close enough. And then propolis can help with
Huh.
retuning the cells to leptin. So if anyone's really struggling with that post mold, it's a real pain. I mean, I had the same problem. I gained, a lot of weight and, I still haven't quite gotten it all off, but it was very, very stubborn weight and I changed nothing. I lost weight during the mold. The minute I got out of mold, my body just ballooned. And it was
Interesting.
that leptin resistance thing. And yeah, so of course I was personally motivated to figure out how to
Yeah, sure.
correct.
But it can get
Yeah,
better, right? I mean, you can
yes.
kind of treat, don't, it doesn't have to turn
Yeah.
into diabetes or something really scary.
It's
Like,
not even related to diabetes either. You can
oh,
have completely perfect hemoglobin A1C and still have a weight problem after mold related to
interesting.
the leptin.
What about, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about all the questions that I got for you, like
I know
hair loss.
that's
Yeah.
trichothecenes. That's a trichothecene thing, particularly. All
And what
mycotoxins.
is what, and
Yeah.
that is another toxic mold that's living behind your wall, just to be clear. Okay. That's
Yep.
not like from like the fermented wine that you drank at Thanksgiving or whatever. No, that's not that.
Nope. That's from indoor environmental exposure. It's hair loss is a very common, we pretty should that is one of the keynotes. Because these mycotoxins, uh, they will interrupt protein synthesis. So you're going to see that most, just like in chemo, does the same thing in the most rapidly dividing cells. So we
Got
see
it.
anemia, just like in chemo. We see hair loss, we see skin changes, skin rashes, aging of the skin, all the things. Gut lining also doesn't turn over fast enough. So that can help with all the detox we talked about. And all this, by the way, is laid out in my book in a very stepwise way.
What is your book?
Also,
Tell us what your
yeah,
book is called.
it's called Break the Mold.
I
I
have to
can't
start
wait for you
reading.
to read it.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't well enough to read when I had my mold illness. I was well enough to watch you for 2 minutes at a time or listen with my eyes closed to a podcast. And that is
Yeah,
what I did. And that was
yeah.
insanely helpful. But I heard that your book is brilliant.
Oh, thank you. I tried to really keep it simple. I really was channeling the me that was mold sick. And I was
Yeah.
like, this is simplify, simplify, simplify. Like it all needs to be simpler. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
It's
totally
called
get.
Break the Mold. It is in audio form. It is me talking. So if anyone wants to hear more of that,
Yeah.
but it is, because same thing, like my eyes didn't work when I was sick too. That was
Yeah.
another thing that I was like, I'm going to prioritize making sure I do an audio version because I couldn't read.
Yeah, it's a
It's
different
too
kind of
hard.
comprehension problem that you
Yeah.
have reading when you feel that way and you have that kind of neuroinflammation. That was my experience anyway. And I think it seems like it's pretty common.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is all
Okay.
laid out in my book, the whole process, the what step first, how dosing, what are the cautions with any kind of supplement, if you have hypertension, can you do this, that kind of thing. So now I lost track of your question.
My question was
Yeah.
about hair loss.
You do the process in my book, but the an added amino acid supplement can make a huge difference because
For
you're not making for the hair, for your hair to grow.
oh, like what? What would that be?
Just any amino acid, like it doesn't have to be specific at all because the mold is getting in the way of us making the essential amino acids. So even like a branched chain amino acid, I had more success with hair loss with using a whole amino acid supplement. So they're really like all the weightlifters take them.
Again, any specific brand that you like that you feel like it has helped you
Um,
or
Yeah, I mean, anything is you're going to be able to get at a regular health food store. Um,
okay.
I believe Thorne is no longer making theirs, but that used to be one of my favorites. And then branched chain amino acids, if it's hair loss and profound fatigue and muscle loss,
Yeah, I was going to
then
ask you about the
the
fatigue.
BCAAs, the BCAA is what it'll be called, but it's a branched chain amino acid. Life
That's great.
Extension makes some really high quality things. There are a lot of nice supplements you can get. Just kind of
Excellent.
put your discernment on there though, that if you're getting it off Amazon, there's a lot of adulteration. It might look like the brand and it may not be the
Yeah.
brand at all.
You
So
got to
order
go to the
directly
store
from the
and
company.
yeah, absolutely. Or order direct, yeah, from the
Yeah.
company. And I guess the last question is, my kid has PANS and we know that that can be a part of, molds can be a part of it. Somebody really wanted to know if they get an exposure out, they've gotten out of their moldy home, they're feeling better, but they have to go into a store or a doctor's office that's really moldy and they get a hit or whatever it is. Do you have a quick way to turn that around that and just get those symptoms to calm down that flare?
Yeah. Nasal sprays are the nicest thing. There's a nice one called Citra Drops you can get from Microbalance. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, Microbalance.
Oh,
And you can use it before, because a lot of the stuff you can do prophylactically. So you can do it before you go into the grocery store, into the dentist's office, and then whatever, just in case. And
mhm.
then you can retreat your nasal spray after you get out, because that's the first interface. So, when I'm talking antifungals, I'm not just talking whole body, I'm talking intranasal as well, because that's what's seeding the whole thing. Every time you swallow, you seed the gut with whatever's
Yeah.
living in your nose. So
Yeah.
addressing the nose pre and post these exposures is huge. Yeah.
That's very, very good information. And also like the anhedonia, that was another question that I got, that
Mhm.
flat feeling of just complete depression. I don't want to go out. I don't want to do anything. Is that related to mold?
Yeah, that's the mitochondria thing. That's that Jedi mind trick we were talking about earlier, that mold is like, just stay. But what's really
Yeah.
happening on the
Yeah.
biochemistry is the cells are literally out of energy. They cannot make energy because the
Yeah.
mycotoxins have changed the membrane, the charge. Any doctor wants to know, I can talk through like the mechanism, but it's impeding mitochondrial function, which means low battery mode. And as we know, our phones they're glitchy when they're on low battery.
Yeah.
So why would
Absolutely.
you you can kind of lose the things you love because you just don't even have the energy to do it.
Yeah.
So that's where I like to go to resveratrol. That one does have a minimum effective dose to hit the plasma concentration we need.
Yeah.
And that's a gram 2 times a day of the it's a gram a day of the trans. So usually if you do, when I say trans, it's trans resveratrol. So if
Okay.
you do a gram of regular resveratrol twice a day, that usually gets you up to that concentration. So that's a
Okay.
good one for like kicking the mitochondria into gear. But so is getting outside like that. You're getting the sunshine, you're getting all of this stuff that you can't put in a bottle.
Yeah.
You're not getting outside every day, start there. Don't take
Okay.
anything, don't add any drugs, anything like that. Get the body outside first.
Okay. I love that. Well, on that note, you're going to have a mad rush of people going, I need these supplements. I need this information. My doctor needs to know this. Where can we go?
Yeah. So it's drkrista.com, drkrista.com. And if
Mhm.
you know the mycotoxin that you can't get rid of, if you're doing testing, you can go drkrista.com/ put in the mycotoxin, and there's a whole fact sheet. What are the symptoms correlated with that? How do you detoxify it? So it gives you a whole fact sheet on that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jill. This has been incredibly wonderful.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a real honor to be part of your program.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Tictective, a program of the Bay Area Lyme Foundation. For more information or to get involved, please visit us at bayarealyme.org.